I'm Maya, 24 years old now. But this story begins in our suburban neighborhood in Phoenix where my teenage years became a living nightmare. My stepbrother Derek had anger issues and my mother had selective blindness. When I was 17, questioning, his lies earned me a tumble down our marble staircase that could have killed me. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. That night, as I lay in the hospital with a concussion and 3 broken ribs, I made a promise that would change everything. The security footage they thought was deleted would become the key to my freedom. What they didn't know was that their cover-up didn't erase the truth. It preserved it. The house on Saguaro Drive still appears in my dreams sometimes, though not as the nightmare it became, but as the sanctuary it once was. Before Derek, before Richard, before everything fell apart, that house was filled with the kind of laughter that echoes through walls and creates memories you carry forever. My biological father, James Chen, was the kind of man who made ordinary moments feel magical. He worked as a software engineer for a tech startup, but his true passion was photography. Our weekends were spent exploring Arizona's desert landscapes, him teaching me about composition and light while I pretended to understand aperture settings. The real lessons weren't about cameras. They were about seeing beauty in unexpected places, about patience, about the value of capturing authentic moments. He called me his little desert flower, a nickname that made me feel both delicate and resilient, like the cacti blooms we'd photograph in the early morning light. Our house was modest, but warm, filled with his landscape photographs and my mother Elena's pottery. She worked part-time as a dental hygienist then, spending her afternoons at the pottery wheel in our converted garage, her hands always slightly stained with clay. I remember coming home from school to find them dancing in the kitchen while dinner simmered, Dad's camera abandoned on the counter because some moments were too precious to view through a lens. Elena would laugh when he spun her around, flour from her baking dusting his dark hair white. Those were the days when our biggest problems were whose turn it was to do dishes or whether we could afford the family vacation to Sedona. The accident happened on a Tuesday in October when I was 11. Dad was driving home from a client meeting in Scottsdale when another driver ran a red light. The impact killed him instantly, they told us later, as if that detail would somehow make the loss easier to bear. I learned that day that there's no gentle way to deliver devastating news, no words that can soften the edges of complete destruction. Elena became a different person overnight. The woman who once hummed while cooking dinner fell silent for months. Her pottery wheel gathered dust as she struggled to maintain even basic routines. I watched her shrink into herself, her vibrant energy replaced by a hollow-eyed exhaustion that scared me more than my own grief. We moved through the house like ghosts, eating cereal for dinner, sleeping with all the lights on because the darkness felt too heavy. The financial pressure was immediate and overwhelming. Dad's life insurance covered the mortgage, but Elena's part-time income wasn't enough for everything else. She picked up extra shifts at the dental office, working early mornings and late evenings, leaving me alone more often than either of us was comfortable with. I learned to make my own breakfast, pack my own lunch, help with laundry, responsibilities that felt enormous at 11 but would later seem trivial compared to what was coming. School became my refuge during those dark months. My teachers, especially Mrs. Rodriguez in 6th grade, recognized the signs of a child processing trauma. She kept me after class sometimes, not for academic help, but just to talk. She introduced me to the school's peer tutoring program, where helping younger students with reading gave me a sense of purpose when everything else felt meaningless. It was through the school's grief counseling group that Elena met Richard Blackwood. He was there because his ex-wife had died in a car accident, leaving him to raise his 14-year-old son Derek alone. The counselor thought it would be helpful for single parents to connect, to share strategies for navigating loss while maintaining stability for their children. Richard appeared to be everything Elena needed: stable, financially secure, eager to help. He worked as a project manager for a construction company, owned his house outright, and drove a truck that never seemed to need repairs. When he offered to fix our leaky kitchen faucet one Saturday afternoon, Elena cried with relief. It was the first time I'd seen her smile in months. Derek, at 14, was the kind of teenager who commanded attention without trying. Tall for his age, athletic from years of baseball and football, with his father's broad shoulders and his mother's striking green eyes. He had that easy confidence that some kids just seem born with, the kind that makes adults say things like, "He'll go far," and "natural leader." In those early months, he was polite to Elena, protective of his father, and largely indifferent to me. Richard's pursuit of Elena was methodical and patient. He brought groceries when she worked late, picked me up from school when her car wouldn't start, included us in weekend activities that slowly rebuilt our capacity for joy. Elena began to laugh again, tentatively at first, then with genuine warmth. She started wearing makeup to work, buying new clothes, talking about future plans instead of just surviving each day. The changes were gradual enough that they felt natural. Richard's tools appeared in our garage alongside Dad's photography equipment. His coffee mug claimed a spot in our kitchen cabinet. Derek's baseball gear found space in our hallway closet when he stayed over on weekends. Elena consulted Richard about household decisions, whether to replace the aging water heater, which contractor to hire for the roof repairs, how to handle my emerging teenage attitudes. When they announced their engagement 18 months after Dad's death, Elena's excitement was infectious. She showed me the modest diamond ring with the enthusiasm of a teenager, talking about wedding plans and honeymoon destinations with an energy I hadn't seen since before the accident. I was genuinely happy for her, grateful that someone had restored her capacity for joy, even if I sometimes felt like I was watching our old life disappear piece by piece. The wedding was small, held in Elena's sister Carmen's backyard with white, folding chairs and strings of lights that turned magical as evening fell. Elena wore a simple blue dress that matched her eyes, and Richard couldn't stop smiling. Derek stood beside his father in an ill-fitting suit, looking bored but behaving appropriately. I held Elena's bouquet during the ceremony, trying to ignore the slight pang in my chest when she promised to love Richard, until death do us part. The same words she'd once spoken to my father. The blended family adjustment period that followed felt awkward, but manageable. We moved into Richard's larger house in a better neighborhood, where the schools had better reputations and the houses had swimming pools and 3-car garages. My new room was bigger than my old one, with a walk-in closet and its own bathroom. Luxuries. That should have felt exciting, but instead felt foreign. Richard made genuine efforts to connect with me during those first months. He asked about school, helped with homework when Elena was working late, even attempted to learn about photography when he discovered Dad's camera equipment in my closet. His interest felt forced but sincere, like a man trying to fill a role he didn't naturally understand but was determined to master. The dynamic with Derek was more complicated. At 15, he was navigating his own adolescent challenges while adjusting to sharing his father's attention and his space. He wasn't openly hostile, but he wasn't friendly either. We coexisted politely, like roommates who happened to share the same breakfast table. He'd ask me to pass the juice, I'd remind him to take his plate to the sink, and we'd both pretend this arrangement felt normal. For nearly a year, this careful balance held. Elena's happiness seemed genuine as she threw herself into creating the perfect blended family. She organized family game nights, planned elaborate holiday celebrations, and insisted on family photos that captured our new life together. Richard provided stability and security, handling household emergencies with competence, planning family vacations to places we'd never been able to afford, talking about college funds and retirement savings with the confidence of someone who had everything under control. I adapted by excelling academically, joining the debate team and honor society, spending long hours studying and participating in extracurricular activities that kept me busy and productive. My grades had always been good, but they became exceptional during this period, as if academic achievement could somehow prove my worth in this new family structure. Elena praised my report cards proudly, and Richard nodded approvingly. But something felt performative about their responses, like we were all playing roles in a family drama none of us had auditioned for. The cracks began to show subtly at first. Derek's politeness toward Elena started to feel more calculated, his responses to her questions just slightly delayed, as if he was editing his thoughts before speaking. He tested boundaries carefully, staying out past curfew by 15 minutes, forgetting to complete assigned chores, making comments that skirted the edge of disrespect without crossing into territory that would provoke Richard's discipline. Richard's parenting style differed dramatically from Elena's, where she had always been gentle but firm, explaining consequences and encouraging communication. Richard favored clear rules with immediate punishments. Derek understood this system and navigated it expertly, but I struggled with the rigidity after years of collaborative problem-solving with Elena. When I questioned a restriction or tried to negotiate a rule, Richard interpreted it as defiance rather than discussion. The favoritism wasn't obvious enough to call out directly, but it permeated everything. Derek's baseball equipment filled the garage while my art supplies were relegated to a corner of the basement. His friends were always welcome to hang out and eat our food, but when I asked to have friends over, Elena had to check with Richard first. Derek's phone plan had unlimited data, while mine had restrictions that were appropriate for my age, despite being only 2 years younger. Most telling were the different standards applied to our mistakes. When Derek accidentally broke Elena's favorite pottery piece, a vase she'd made in memory of my father, Richard's response was calm and measured. "Accidents happen, son. We'll help Elena replace it." When I spilled nail polish on the bathroom counter a week later, creating a small stain that could be easily cleaned, Richard's reaction was sharp and disproportionate. This is exactly the kind of carelessness that shows a lack of respect for other people's property. Elena's responses to these incidents revealed the subtle shift in her priorities. She accepted Richard's replacement vase graciously, never mentioning that the original couldn't truly be replaced because it carried emotional significance beyond its monetary value. But she lectured me extensively about being more careful, about respecting the home Richard had generously shared with us, about remembering that we were guests who needed to prove we deserved to stay. The word guest hit me like a physical blow. In what was supposed to be my home, I was being redefined as a temporary visitor whose continued welcome depended on perfect behavior and constant gratitude. Elena didn't seem to notice what she had said, but Derek smiled slightly, the first genuine expression I'd seen from him in weeks. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. That night, alone in my too-large bedroom in a house that still smelled like someone else's life, I began to understand that the careful balance we'd maintained was an illusion. The real family dynamics were already established. Richard and Derek on one side, Elena trying desperately to bridge the gap, and me on the outside, tolerated but not truly belonging. I pulled out my father's old camera, one of the few possessions I'd brought from our old house, and looked through the viewfinder at the unfamiliar room around me. Through the lens, everything looked slightly distorted. Reality shifted just enough to feel foreign and unwelcoming. I didn't know it yet, but that camera would eventually become the tool that would save my life and expose the truth about what my new family was really capable of. For now, though, I was still trying to fit into the frame they'd created for me, still believing that if I was good enough, grateful enough, invisible enough, I could earn my place in this new version of home. I had no idea that Derek was already planning to ensure I'd never truly belong anywhere in his father's house. The foundation was cracking, but the real earthquake was still coming. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It was more like watching A photograph developed in a dark room. Slowly, the true image emerged from what had initially appeared to be something else entirely. Derek's junior year of high school marked the beginning of what I now recognize as a calculated campaign. His grades, which had been mediocre but acceptable, began to slip dramatically. Not enough to trigger immediate intervention, but sufficient to create stress in the household. Richard's response was predictable. Derek needed fewer distractions, more focus, additional support to reach his potential. The first casualty was our family game nights. Derek needs quiet time to study, Richard announced one Thursday evening as Elena set up the Monopoly board. Maybe we could do something that doesn't require so much noise. Elena's face fell, but she nodded understanding. Of course, Maya. And I can work on puzzles instead. Much quieter. But Derek wasn't studying during those canceled game nights. I could hear his video games through the walls, the rapid-fire sounds of gunshots and explosions that continued well past his supposed bedtime. When I mentioned this to Elena, she made excuses. Maybe it's educational games. Or maybe he's taking breaks between studying. You know how hard it is for him to concentrate after losing his mother so young. The mention of Derek's mother always ended discussions. She had died when Derek was 8, a tragedy that Richard used to explain away almost any problematic behavior. Bad grades, unresolved grief, angry outbursts, trauma response, lies and manipulation, coping mechanisms. The truth was more complex and far more disturbing. Derek had learned early that his mother's death was a universal excuse that adults couldn't challenge without appearing heartless. He wielded this tragedy like a shield, protecting him from accountability while simultaneously gaining sympathy and special treatment. It was masterful manipulation from someone who was barely 16. My sophomore year brought new challenges as Derek's behavior escalated in small but significant ways. He began borrowing my belongings without asking. My favorite sweater would disappear from my closet only to reappear in the laundry basket days later, stretched and faded. My art supplies vanished regularly, usually when I had projects due. When I complained, Derek would look genuinely confused. I thought we were supposed to share everything now that we're family. Richard consistently sided with Derek during these disputes. Family members help each other out, he'd say. Maya, you need to be more generous with your brother. The word brother felt wrong every time he said it, but correcting him only resulted in lectures about acceptance and unity. Elena, caught between supporting me and maintaining peace, usually remained silent, her pottery wheel spinning faster during these arguments, as if the clay could absorb the tension in the room. The bathroom incident marked a turning point. Derek and I shared a bathroom between our bedrooms, an arrangement that initially seemed reasonable. But Derek began leaving messes that were clearly intentional. Toothpaste smeared on the mirror, hair clogging the drain, wet towels dropped on the floor. When I cleaned up after him, he'd mess it up again within hours. When I stopped cleaning, Elena would find the bathroom in shambles and assume I was responsible. Maya, you're old enough to maintain basic hygiene standards, she'd scold, while Derek stood behind her with a slight smirk that disappeared the moment she turned around. I raised you better than this. The injustice burned, but pointing fingers made me look childish and petty. Derek had calculated this perfectly. His messes were subtle enough to be plausibly accidental, frequent enough to be genuinely irritating, and always discovered when he had an alibi. School became my primary escape, but even there, Derek's influence began to spread. We attended the same high school, and Derek's popularity among his peers was undeniable. He was the starting pitcher on the baseball team, dating the head cheerleader, invited to every party. His social status created a protective barrier that made challenging his version of events nearly impossible. When I joined the photography club, Derek suddenly developed an interest in sports photography. It's great that you kids have a shared hobby, Richard beamed, completely missing the predatory way Derek studied my camera equipment and techniques. Derek's interest lasted exactly long enough to learn which events I'd be photographing, allowing him to arrange his social schedule to ensure maximum disruption of my activities. The spring photography competition became a battleground. I had spent months preparing a portfolio focused on desert landscapes, inspired by my father's work, but developing my own artistic voice. The night before the submission deadline, my camera bag was soaked with sports drink, an accident that occurred when Derek left his gym bag too close to my equipment. The camera survived, but several prints were ruined. "Accidents happen," Richard said when I tearfully explained what had occurred. "Maybe next year you'll be more careful about where you store important things." Derek offered to help me reprint the damaged photos, his tone so genuinely helpful that I almost believed he felt guilty. But when I developed the replacement prints, subtle changes had been made to my camera settings, resulting in images that were slightly out of focus and underexposed. Elena found me crying in the darkroom later that night, but her comfort felt hollow. "I'm sure Derek didn't mean to damage your things, honey. He's going through a difficult time with college applications and baseball season." The pattern was established. Derek's needs, struggles, and excuses always took precedence over my legitimate grievances. My feelings were secondary, my experiences minimized, my truth constantly questioned. The college preparatory process revealed another layer of favoritism. Derek's mediocre grades and test scores didn't prevent Richard from hiring expensive tutors and college consultants. His baseball skills, while decent, weren't exceptional enough to guarantee athletic scholarships. But Richard contacted every coach personally, leveraging business connections and alumni networks to create opportunities. Meanwhile, my straight A's and high test scores were expected rather than celebrated. "Maya's always been academically gifted," Elena would say dismissively. "She doesn't need the same level of support." When I expressed interest in art school, Richard's response was swift and decisive. "Art isn't a practical career choice. You should focus on something stable that will provide financial security." The message was clear. Derek's dreams deserved investment and support, while mine needed to be practical and self-funded. College brochures for prestigious universities appeared regularly on Derek's desk, while my art school catalogs mysteriously disappeared from the mail. When I mentioned this pattern to Elena, she seemed genuinely surprised, as if she hadn't noticed the differential treatment that was becoming increasingly obvious. Summer before my junior year brought a new level of psychological warfare. With Derek home from baseball camps and Richard working longer hours on construction projects, the dynamic in the house shifted dramatically. Elena picked up extra shifts to help pay for Derek's college preparation expenses, leaving Derek and me alone together more frequently. During these unsupervised periods, Derek's true personality emerged completely. He would eat food I'd prepared for myself, wear my clothes, use my personal items, all while maintaining plausible deniability. "I thought it was for everyone," became his standard response, delivered with wide-eyed innocence that would have been convincing if I hadn't seen the calculating look in his eyes moments before. He began inviting friends over without permission, turning the house into an impromptu party venue while Elena worked. When she discovered evidence of these gatherings, empty beer cans, food crumbs, damaged furniture, Derek's explanation was always ready. Maya said it was okay. She wanted to seem cool to the older kids. My denials fell on deaf ears because Derek's friends would corroborate his story, protecting their party venue and their popular host. The gaslighting became more sophisticated and cruel. Derek would rearrange items in my room, then act concerned when I noticed things were out of place. "Are you feeling okay, Maya? You seem confused lately." He'd change settings on my alarm clock, causing me to oversleep and miss important events, then express sympathy for my increasing forgetfulness. He'd hide my homework, then suggest to Elena that I was becoming irresponsible and disorganized, as a way of acting out due to teenage stress. Elena began to view me with increasing concern. interpreting Derek's manufactured evidence as signs of emotional instability. "Maybe we should consider counseling," she suggested after a particularly convincing performance from Derek about finding me talking to myself in my room. I had actually been practicing a speech for the debate team, but Derek's version painted me as potentially unhinged. The isolation was devastating. At school, Derek's social circle treated me with polite distance, following his lead and viewing me as the weird stepsister who caused problems at home. Teachers who had once appreciated my academic performance began to notice my attitude problems after Derek shared carefully crafted stories about my behavior at home. Even my few close friends started to question my version of events when Derek's charm offensive reached them through mutual acquaintances. Technology became Derek's most effective weapon. He discovered my social media passwords through Keylogger, software installed on the family computer, allowing him to monitor my online activities and communications. He'd take screenshots of private conversations, then use them to humiliate me in front of his friends or to create drama with my own social circle. More insidiously, he began creating fake social media accounts to cyberbully me anonymously. Comments about my appearance, my family situation, and my social awkwardness appeared regularly on my posts, coming from accounts that couldn't be traced back to him. When I showed Elena the harassment, Derek was always ready with comfort and support, positioning himself as my protector while secretly orchestrating the attacks. The breaking point came during a family barbecue that Richard had organized to celebrate Derek's acceptance to Arizona State University. Extended family members, neighbors, and family friends gathered to congratulate Derek on his achievement, an achievement that had required significant financial investment, tutoring, and Richard's business connections to facilitate. During the party, Derek's girlfriend Ashley made comments about how lucky I was to have such a supportive family. "Derek's always talking about how much he cares about you," she said sweetly. "He says he worries that you don't appreciate everything your parents do for you." The conversation was taking place within earshot of several adults, including Elena's sister Carmen, who had always been protective of me. I felt compelled to defend myself, to explain that the family dynamic wasn't as harmonious as it appeared. But before I could respond, Derek appeared with perfect timing, throwing his arm around my shoulders in a gesture that appeared brotherly and affectionate. "Maya's going through a tough time with junior year stress," he announced to the group. "I keep telling her that family is the most important thing, especially after we've both lost a parent." The manipulation was flawless. Derek had positioned himself as the caring older brother concerned about his troubled sister, while simultaneously undermining my credibility and explaining away any complaints I might make about our family dynamic. Carmen's expression softened with sympathy, and Ashley nodded understanding, completely taken in by Derek's performance. Later that evening, as guests were leaving and Derek was accepting congratulations for his college acceptance, I overheard a conversation between Richard and one of his business partners. "You've done a great job with that boy," the man was saying. "Not easy raising kids these days, especially with all the blended family challenges." Richard's response revealed the depth of his favoritism and the extent to which he'd bought into Derek's narrative about me. "Derek's been amazing through all the transitions. It's Maya we worry about. She's been struggling with accepting our family situation, acting out, causing problems. Elena thinks it might be related to losing her father so young. But honestly, I think some kids just have difficulty with change." Standing in the shadows of the kitchen, listening to my character being assassinated by people who were supposed to love and protect me, I realized that Derek had achieved something truly remarkable. He had convinced everyone around us that he was the victim of my instability, the hero of our family story, the son that Richard had always wanted. Meanwhile, I had been recast as the problem child, the ungrateful daughter, the source of family discord. That night, alone in my room with the sounds of celebration still echoing through the house, I began to understand that I was fighting a battle I couldn't win through conventional means. Derek was too smart, too popular, too protected by his status as Richard's son and his tragic backstory. Elena was too invested in maintaining family harmony to see what was happening right in front of her. I needed evidence. Real, undeniable proof of what Derek was doing to me. I needed something that couldn't be explained away, manipulated, or dismissed as teenage drama. I needed to document the truth in a way that would be impossible to ignore or reframe. I pulled out my father's camera and began to plan. If Derek wanted to play games with reality, I would use the one skill my father had given me, the ability to capture truth through a lens. I would document everything, create a record that couldn't be gaslighted or explained away. What I didn't know was that Derek was planning something far more dangerous than psychological manipulation. The stakes were about to become much higher than hurt feelings and damaged belongings. He was preparing to escalate to physical violence, and when that moment came, the only thing standing between me and serious injury would be a small security camera I hadn't even installed yet. The house on Saguaro Drive was about to become the scene of an attempted murder, and the only witness would be a digital eye that no one knew was watching. The security camera installation happened purely by accident, or perhaps by fate. Richard had been experiencing break-ins at several of his construction sites, losing tools and equipment worth thousands of dollars. His solution was to invest in a comprehensive home security system, both to protect our house and to test the equipment before installing it at his job sites. "It's a smart investment," he explained to Elena as technicians wired cameras throughout the house. "Property values are going up in this neighborhood, and we need to protect what we've built here." The irony of his words would become apparent. Later, Richard was indeed protecting what he'd built, just not in the way he intended. The cameras were state-of-the-art, with motion activation, night vision, and cloud storage backup that Richard could monitor from his phone. They were positioned strategically: front door, backyard, garage, and most importantly for what was to come, the main staircase that connected the first and second floors. The staircase camera was Richard's idea, positioned to capture anyone entering or leaving the upstairs bedrooms, ostensibly for security, but also to monitor Derek's late-night movements during his rebellious phase. Derek seemed amused by the camera installation, making jokes about feeling like a celebrity under constant surveillance. "Are you going to start charging admission for people to watch the Derek show?" he quipped, flexing dramatically for the camera at the bottom of the stairs. His confidence suggested he had no intention of altering his behavior despite the added scrutiny. In fact, the cameras seemed to energize him, as if he was excited about the challenge of outsmarting technology. What none of us knew was that the system had a hidden feature. The technician, perhaps feeling generous or wanting to impress Richard, with additional value, had included a backup storage device hidden in the basement utility room. This secondary system recorded continuously for 72 hours before overwriting, providing redundancy in case the main system failed or was tampered with. The technician mentioned it briefly during the walkthrough, but Richard was distracted by a work call and didn't fully absorb the information. My junior year intensified in ways I hadn't anticipated. Advanced placement classes demanded more time and energy, college preparation activities multiplied, and the pressure to maintain my perfect academic record while navigating Derek's psychological warfare became overwhelming. I had started carrying my father's camera everywhere, hoping to catch Derek in the act of one of his many manipulations, but he was too clever to be caught so easily. The photography documentation project I'd conceived was proving more difficult than expected. Derek's harassment was psychological rather than physical, making it nearly impossible to capture concrete evidence. A rearranged room, missing homework, changed alarm settings. These things couldn't be photographed in a way that would convince skeptical adults. I needed something more substantial, something undeniably malicious that couldn't be explained away as teenage sibling rivalry. Meanwhile, Derek's college plans were solidifying in ways that increased his confidence and decreased his caution. Arizona State had not only accepted him, but offered a partial baseball scholarship after Richard's networking efforts. The scholarship wasn't based solely on Derek's athletic ability. Richard had made significant donations to the athletic department and leveraged relationships with alumni to create opportunities for his son. Derek's sense of invincibility grew with each success that was handed to him. He began taking bigger risks, pushing boundaries further, testing how much he could get away with. His treatment of me evolved from subtle manipulation to more overt cruelty, as if he was preparing for a grand finale before leaving for college. The first physical escalation occurred during a family dinner in late February. Derek had been describing his plans for spring break, a trip to California funded by Richard, ostensibly to visit college campuses, but actually to party with friends at beach resorts. Elena had prepared Derek's favorite meal to celebrate his scholarship announcement, and the conversation focused entirely on his achievements and future plans. When I mentioned that I'd been selected for a summer photography intensive at Arizona State, a competitive program that would look impressive on college applications, Derek's reaction was swift and telling. "That's great, Maya," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm sure the pictures will be really artistic." He emphasized the word artistic with subtle mockery, then reached across the table for the salt, deliberately knocking over my water glass in the process. The water soaked my portfolio materials that I'd brought to show Elena, ruining several prints I'd planned to submit for a scholarship application. "Oh no," Derek said, jumping up to help clean the mess. "I'm so clumsy. Here, let me help." But as he grabbed napkins to blot the water, he made sure to press down on the photos, ensuring maximum damage to the paper and ink. "It's okay," Elena said quickly, always eager to prevent conflict. "Accidents happen. Maya can reprint those, right, honey?" She didn't see the satisfied glint in Derek's eyes or notice how precisely he'd executed the accident. Richard was already back to discussing Derek's college plans, dismissing the incident as unworthy of interrupting more important conversations. Later that evening, as I worked in the dark room to replace the damaged prints, Derek appeared in the doorway. The red safety light cast sinister shadows across his face, making him look older and more menacing than his 17 years. "You should be more careful with your important stuff," he said conversationally, "especially around me. I'm naturally clumsy, you know." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Derek was warning me that my belongings, my projects, my achievements were all vulnerable to his accidents. He wasn't even pretending anymore that these incidents were unintentional. Standing in the red-lit darkness, I realized that Derek had moved beyond psychological games into something more dangerous. March brought an escalation that caught everyone off guard, including Derek himself. Elena had won a small art competition at a local gallery, her first recognition as an artist since Dad's death. The prize included a cash award and a feature in the community newspaper, achievements that filled her with pride and renewed creative energy. For the first time in years, she seemed genuinely happy about something that belonged entirely to her. Derek's reaction to Elena's success was immediate and vicious. He began a campaign to undermine her confidence and diminish her achievement, using tactics he'd perfected on me. He would make subtle comments about the low quality of local art competitions, question whether her pottery was really professional level, and suggest that her time might be better spent on more practical pursuits that would benefit the family. Richard, perhaps feeling threatened by Elena's independent success, supported Derek's subtle campaign. "It's wonderful that you're pursuing your hobbies, honey," he'd say patronizingly. "Just make sure it doesn't interfere with your responsibilities to the family." The message was clear. Elena's art was acceptable as long as it remained secondary to her roles as wife and stepmother. Watching Elena's excitement dim under their combined pressure triggered something protective in me that had been dormant for too long. When Derek made a particularly cruel comment about Elena's pottery being cute crafts for middle-aged housewives, I snapped. "She's a real artist," I said firmly, my voice carrying across the dinner table. "Her work is beautiful and meaningful, which is more than I can say for your baseball participation trophies." The silence that followed was deafening. Elena looked terrified. Richard appeared shocked, and Derek's face transformed with genuine rage for the first time in my presence. "Excuse me?" Derek said, his voice dangerously quiet. "What did you just say about my achievements?" His mask had slipped completely, revealing the angry, entitled person beneath the charming facade. Richard started to intervene, but Derek held up a hand. "No, Dad. I want to hear Maya explain why she thinks she can talk to me like that." I had crossed a line that Derek had carefully drawn around his public image and achievements. In front of our parents, I had called out his mediocrity and challenged his superiority complex. The punishment for this transgression would be swift and severe, though it wouldn't come immediately. Derek was too smart to retaliate in front of witnesses. The rest of dinner passed in tense silence, with Elena nervously trying to restore harmony, and Richard clearly planning a lecture about respect and family unity. But Derek said nothing more, simply watching me with calculating eyes, already planning his revenge. 3 days later, my laptop disappeared from my room. Not stolen, Derek was too clever for that, but borrowed without permission while I was at school. When I discovered it missing, Derek was at baseball practice, providing him with a perfect alibi. I found the laptop later in the family room, with Derek claiming he'd needed it for a last-minute school project. But when I logged in, I discovered that Derek had done more than borrow it. He'd accessed my email accounts, social media profiles, and personal documents. Worse, he'd sent messages from my accounts to several teachers and friends, messages that were subtly inappropriate or offensive enough to damage relationships and create problems at school. The messages were crafted with Derek's characteristic cunning. Nothing overtly malicious, but each one designed to create maximum embarrassment and social fallout. A flirtatious message to my male debate coach that made future interactions awkward. A complaint email to my photography teacher about unfair grading that made me look entitled and difficult. Social media posts that were just strange enough to make friends question my judgment. When I confronted Derek about the laptop incident, he was ready with his defense. "I just borrowed it for homework, Maya. I don't know anything about messages you sent while I was at practice. Maybe you forgot to send them. You've been pretty stressed lately." His gaslighting had become more sophisticated, and his alibi was airtight. Elena's response to my accusations revealed how completely Derek had poisoned the well against me. "Maya, honey, these conspiracy theories about Derek are becoming concerning. Maybe we should talk to someone about why you're having such a hard time accepting him as part of our family." The suggestion of therapy wasn't offered as support, it was positioned as treatment for my alleged mental health issues. April escalated the stakes dramatically. Derek had been accepted to several colleges with varying levels of financial aid, but Arizona State remained his top choice due to the baseball scholarship and proximity to home. Richard was planning a celebration party for Derek's 18th birthday and college acceptance, inviting extended family, business associates, and Derek's friends for a backyard barbecue that would serve as both birthday party and college send-off. The guest list included people whose opinions mattered to Richard's business reputation and social standing. Derek understood the importance of this event to his father and saw it as the perfect opportunity for a grand gesture that would cement his position as the favored son, while simultaneously destroying my credibility once and for all. In the weeks leading up to the party, Derek's behavior became increasingly erratic and aggressive. He would accidentally shoulder-check me in hallways, step on my feet while passing in the kitchen, grab items from my hands with unnecessary force. Each incident was subtle enough to appear accidental, but the pattern was clear. Derek was escalating toward physical confrontation. The breaking point came the night before Derek's party. Elena had spent days preparing food, decorating the backyard, and coordinating details to ensure everything would be perfect for Richard's guests. She was exhausted but happy, excited to celebrate Derek's achievements and proud of the family unity the event would demonstrate. I was in my room, editing photos for a portfolio submission that was due the following Monday, when Derek appeared, in my doorway. He'd been drinking, not enough to be obviously intoxicated, but enough to lower his inhibitions and remove his usual careful control. "So, Maya," he said, leaning against the doorframe with practiced casualness. "Tomorrow's going to be a big day. Lots of important people here, lots of congratulations for me, lots of attention on our happy family." He paused, studying my face. "It would be really unfortunate if anything happened to ruin the party. If someone made a scene or caused drama that embarrassed Dad." The threat was explicit this time, no subtlety or plausible deniability. Derek was warning me to stay silent and invisible during his celebration, to play the role of the grateful stepsister who appreciated everything the family had done for her. But something in his tone suggested he wasn't planning to leave my compliance to chance. "I wouldn't dream of ruining your special day," I replied carefully, trying to keep my voice neutral. "I'm sure it will be perfect." But even as I said the words, I could see Derek calculating, planning, preparing for something that would ensure I couldn't interfere with his moment of triumph. He smiled then, the cold, predatory expression I'd learned to fear. "Good girl, Maya. I'm glad we understand each other." As he turned to leave, he paused at the threshold. "By the way, you might want to be extra careful tomorrow. Big parties can be dangerous places. People get hurt when they're not paying attention to where they're going." That night, I barely slept. Derek's warning echoed in my mind, and I found myself analyzing every possible scenario, every way he might engineer an accident that would remove me from his celebration while making me look unstable or attention-seeking. I considered skipping the party entirely, claiming illness or making plans elsewhere, but that would only postpone the inevitable confrontation. Instead, I made a decision that would save my life. I set up my father's camera in my room, positioned to record anyone who entered while I was away. It was a small precaution, but it represented a shift in my thinking, from passive victim to active documenter of the truth. What I didn't know was that Derek had made his own preparations. The accident he was planning would be far more serious than anything he'd attempted before. He wasn't just planning to embarrass or humiliate me. He was planning to seriously injure me, perhaps even kill me, in a way that would appear completely accidental. The marble staircase that had seemed so elegant when we first moved into Richard's house was about to become a weapon. And the only thing standing between me and potential death would be a security camera that Derek had forgotten was there, silently recording everything that happened in our supposedly perfect blended family home. The morning of Derek's birthday, party dawned bright and cloudless, the kind of perfect Arizona day that makes postcards and real estate brochures. Elena was up before sunrise, arranging flowers and setting up buffet tables in the backyard, her nervous energy filling the house with the sounds of preparation. Richard left early to pick up the custom cake and additional folding chairs, whistling contentedly as he headed out to ensure every detail of his son's celebration would be flawless. Derek slept until noon, emerging from his room with the lazy confidence of someone who knew the entire day would revolve around his achievements. He moved through the house like a king surveying his domain, sampling Elena's appetizers, adjusting decorations to his preferences, and making suggestions that sounded like orders. "The banner should be more centered," he told Elena, pointing to the congratulatory sign she'd hung across the patio. "And maybe we need more ice. I don't want my friends to think we're cheap." I spent the morning in my room, ostensibly working on homework, but actually trying to calm my nerves and prepare for whatever Derek had planned. The camera I'd positioned the night before felt like inadequate protection, but it was something. My father's voice echoed in my memory. "Sometimes the most important shot is the one you don't know you're taking." The guests began arriving at 2:00, a steady stream of neighbors, family friends, Richard's business associates, and Derek's baseball teammates. Elena had transformed our backyard into a proper celebration venue, with string lights, color-coordinated decorations, and Enough food to feed twice the expected crowd. Richard worked the party like a politician, introducing Derek to important contacts and making sure everyone understood what a successful, well-rounded young man his son had become. Derek was in his element, accepting congratulations with practiced humility, telling stories about his college plans, and charming adults with the perfect balance of respect and confidence. Watching him work the crowd, I could see why he was so effective at manipulation. He genuinely was charismatic when he wanted to be, capable of making each person feel like they were the most important guest at the party. For the first 2 hours, I managed to blend into the background successfully. I helped Elena serve food, made polite conversation with relatives I rarely saw, and avoided direct interaction with Derek and his friends. Several guests commented on what a nice family we appeared to be, how well-adjusted Derek seemed despite losing his mother, how fortunate Elena and I were to have Richard's stability in our lives. Elena's sister Carmen pulled me aside during a quiet moment. "You've grown up so much, Maya," she said, studying my face with the scrutiny of someone who remembered the little girl I'd been before Richard and Derek entered our lives. "You seem more serious than you used to be, more careful." There was a question in her observation, an invitation to share what was really happening in our picture-perfect blended family. But before I could respond, Derek appeared beside us with perfect timing. "Aunt Carmen!" he exclaimed, throwing his arms around her in an enthusiastic hug. "I'm so glad you could make it. Maya and I were just talking about how grateful we are for all the family support." His arm snaked around my shoulders, pulling me close in a gesture that appeared affectionate but felt possessive and threatening. Carmen smiled at the display of sibling unity, any concerns about my demeanor immediately forgotten. "It's wonderful to see you two getting along so well. Blended families can be challenging, but you've both handled the transition beautifully." Derek squeezed my shoulder harder, his fingers digging into the sensitive spot where my neck met my collarbone, a warning to maintain the facade. As the afternoon progressed, Derek's friends arrived in larger numbers, transforming the party's atmosphere from family celebration to teenage social event. These weren't just baseball teammates. Derek had invited the popular crowd from school, including several seniors who would be graduating with him and heading to various colleges. The adult guests began to drift away, satisfied with their congratulations, and ready to let the young people enjoy their celebration. Elena and Richard seemed pleased with how well the party was going. Their son was popular, successful, and surrounded by friends who clearly admired him. The investment in his education and athletics was paying dividends in social capital and future opportunities. Standing on the patio, watching Derek hold court. Among his peers, Richard looked like a man who had achieved everything he'd wanted for his family. The shift in dynamics became apparent as the adult supervision decreased. Derek's friends were drinking, not openly, but from flasks and bottles hidden in backpacks and car trunks. The conversations grew louder, the laughter more reckless, and the general atmosphere more unpredictable. Elena noticed the change but seemed unsure how to address it without seeming like an overbearing stepmother. Derek caught me watching from the kitchen window and gestured for me to come outside. It wasn't a request. His friends had been asking about his mysterious stepsister, and he wanted me visible for his grand performance. With no graceful way to refuse without causing a scene, I joined the group on the patio, positioning myself near the back door for easy escape. "Everyone, this is Maya," Derek announced to his friends. "The little artist I was telling you about." The introduction was loaded with subtle mockery that his friends picked up on immediately. I became the object of their attention in a way that felt predatory rather than welcoming. These were teenagers who had learned that Derek's approval was valuable, and they were eager to participate in whatever entertainment he had planned. Ashley, Derek's girlfriend, was particularly cruel in her observations. "You're so much quieter than Derek described," she said with false sweetness. "He says you're really creative, always taking pictures of weird things." The comment drew snickers from the group, establishing me as the odd outsider who didn't belong in their social circle. One of Derek's baseball teammates, a large boy named Marcus who clearly served as Derek's enforcer in social situations, decided to join the entertainment. Derek says you're always imagining things that aren't really happening, like making up stories about people. The comment was designed to undermine my credibility preemptively, ensuring that anything I might say about Derek's behavior would be dismissed as fantasy. Derek watched these exchanges with satisfaction, allowing his friends to do the dirty work while maintaining his position as the gracious host. But I could see the anticipation in his eyes, the excitement of someone who had been planning this moment for weeks. This wasn't random teenage cruelty. It was a carefully orchestrated setup for something larger. The opportunity Derek had been waiting for came when Elena asked me to bring down extra folding chairs from the upstairs storage closet. It was a reasonable request, the kind of helpful task that responsible family members handle during parties. But Derek's eyes lit up when he heard Elena's request, and he immediately volunteered to help me carry the chairs. "That's so thoughtful, Derek," Elena beamed, proud of her stepson's helpfulness. "Maya could use the help with those heavy chairs." Richard nodded approvingly from across the patio, reinforcing the image of Derek as the considerate older brother looking out for his younger sister. Walking toward the house with Derek following close behind, I felt my heart rate accelerate. Every instinct screamed danger, but refusing help with a simple task would make me look paranoid and ungrateful in front of the entire party. Derek had engineered the perfect scenario, a legitimate reason to get me alone upstairs, with witnesses who would remember his offer to help as evidence of his good intentions. The storage closet was at the end of the upstairs hallway, past Derek's room and mine, in an area where sounds from the party below would be muffled. As we climbed the marble staircase together, Derek made casual conversation about the party, how well it was going, how proud Richard seemed of the celebration. His tone was friendly, almost brotherly, but there was an undertone that made my skin crawl. "You know, Maya," he said as we reached the top of the stairs, "I've been thinking about our conversation last night, about being careful during parties." We were standing at the landing now, the long hallway stretching ahead of us, the marble staircase dropping away behind us toward the main floor. Sometimes people create their own accidents by not paying attention to their surroundings. I moved quickly toward the storage closet, wanting to complete the task and get back downstairs as soon as possible, but Derek wasn't following me. He had stopped at the top of the stairs, positioned himself between me and the safest route back to the party. When I turned around with the first load of chairs, I found him blocking my path, his expression no longer friendly. "Actually, Maya, I think we need to have a real conversation about your attitude lately," Derek said, his voice dropping to the tone he used when he wanted to intimidate without being overheard. "You've been disrespectful to my dad, questioning family decisions, making Mom worry about your mental state. It needs to stop." The chairs in my arms suddenly felt inadequate as protection, their lightweight aluminum frames useless against Derek's athletic build and obvious intent. I tried to step around him, but he moved to block me again, this time positioning himself directly at the top of the stairs. Behind him, the marble steps stretched down 15 feet to the hardwood floor of the entryway, an elegant architectural feature that could easily become a deadly weapon. "Derek, people are waiting for these chairs," I said, trying to keep my voice steady and reasonable. "Let's just get them downstairs and finish helping with the party." But even as I spoke, I could see the calculation in his eyes, the way he was measuring distances and angles, planning something that would look like an accident to anyone who wasn't watching carefully. "You know what your problem is, Maya?" Derek continued, his voice still conversational but his body language increasingly threatening. "You think you're too good for this family. You think you deserve better than what my dad has given you. You walk around here like you're some kind of victim, when really you're just an ungrateful little brat who can't appreciate how good she has it." The verbal attack was designed to provoke a reaction, to make me angry enough to step forward aggressively or retreat in fear. Either response would position me exactly where Derek wanted me for what came next. But something in his stance, the way he had planted himself at the top of the stairs, triggered a memory of my father teaching me about photography. Composition. Always be aware of what's behind your subject, Maya. The background can make or break the shot. Derek, I just want to get these chairs downstairs, I repeated, but I was also backing away from him slowly, increasing the distance between us while keeping the heavy chairs positioned as a barrier. Whatever issues you think we need to discuss, this isn't the time or place. That's when Derek's mask slipped completely. The charming, helpful stepbrother disappeared, replaced by someone whose eyes held genuine hatred and violent intent. Actually, Maya, this is the perfect time and place. See, after today, I'm going to college. I'm going to be successful and happy and important. And you're going to be stuck here, being the problem child that ruins mom's happiness and embarrasses. My dad. He took a step toward me, and I could see the plan forming in his mind with terrifying clarity. He was going to push me down the stairs, make it look like I had tripped while carrying the chairs, then play the horrified stepbrother who tried to save me but was too late. The story would be perfect. The clumsy, unstable stepsister who had an accident during his celebration, requiring Derek to call for help and rush me to the hospital, cementing his image as the hero of our family tragedy. But Derek? I said, desperately trying to reason with him while continuing to back away. If something happens to me, it will ruin your party. People will remember your birthday as the day I got hurt. It was a weak argument, but I was hoping to appeal to his narcissism, to make him realize that an accident would overshadow his celebration. Derek smiled then, the cold, calculating expression I'd learned to fear. Oh, Maya, you still don't get it, do you? If something happens to you today, people will remember how brave and caring I was during a family crisis, how I put your safety above my own celebration. It will make me look even better. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Derek hadn't just planned to hurt me. He had planned to use my injury to enhance his own reputation. The timing wasn't accidental. It was deliberate. A dramatic emergency during his party would give him the opportunity to be the hero, the devoted stepbrother, who sacrificed his celebration to help his injured sister. Derek, please, I said, but he was already moving toward me with purpose. The chairs in my arms felt pathetically inadequate as protection against someone who outweighed me by 60 pounds and had the advantage of surprise and positioning. I could hear the party continuing below us, the sounds of laughter and conversation that would mask any brief struggle or cry for help. What happened next occurred in slow motion and lightning speed simultaneously. Derek lunged forward, his hands reaching for my shoulders to push me backward toward the stairs. But as I tried to dodge away from him, the chairs in my arms tangled together, throwing me off balance. Instead of pushing me cleanly down the stairs as he'd planned, Derek's shove caught me at an awkward angle. I fell sideways and backward, the chairs clattering around me as I tumbled down the marble staircase. The sound was tremendous. Metal, hitting stone, my body striking the hard edges of the steps. The final crash as I landed at the bottom in a heap of aluminum chairs and broken pottery from a side table I'd knocked over during the fall. The pain was immediate and overwhelming. My head had struck the marble repeatedly during the tumble. My ribs felt like they were on fire, and something was definitely wrong with my left arm. But through the haze of pain and shock, I could hear Derek's voice from the top of the stairs, already calling for help with perfect panic and concern. Mom, Dad, someone help. Maya fell down the stairs. I think she's really hurt. I tried to catch her, but I couldn't reach her in time. The sound of running footsteps, screaming voices, and general chaos filled the house as the party guests rushed inside to see what had happened. Through my blurred vision, I could see Derek descending the stairs carefully, his face a mask of worry and distress. To anyone watching, he looked like the devoted stepbrother, horrified by his sister's accident and desperate to help. Elena reached me first, her hands fluttering over my injuries while she called my name repeatedly. Richard appeared moments later, already reaching for his phone to call 911, his face pale with shock. Derek positioned himself beside them, playing his role perfectly as the concerned family member who had witnessed a terrible accident. "She was carrying too many chairs at once," Derek explained to the gathering crowd, his voice shaking with what sounded like genuine emotion. "I offered to help, but she said she could handle it. I saw her lose her balance at the top of the stairs and tried to grab her, but it happened so fast, I couldn't stop her from falling." As the paramedics arrived and began assessing my injuries, I tried to tell them what really happened. But Derek had been right about one thing. I was the unstable stepsister with a history of making accusations against him. My claims about being pushed were dismissed as possible head injury confusion, especially when multiple witnesses confirmed that Derek had been trying to help me carry chairs, had offered assistance, and had been the first to call for help. The security camera that would change everything was still recording silently, capturing the truth that no one would think to check for weeks. In the immediate chaos of the emergency, with paramedics working to stabilize me and police asking routine questions about the accident, no one considered reviewing the house's security footage. Why would they? Derek's story was consistent, believable, and supported by the evidence of scattered chairs and his obvious distress. As I was loaded into the ambulance, drifting in and out of consciousness from the head injury, I could see Derek standing beside Elena and Richard on the front steps. He had his arm around Elena's shoulders in a comforting gesture, and his face showed exactly the right mixture of shock, concern, and relief that I was getting medical attention. The last thing I saw before the ambulance doors closed was Derek meeting my eyes across the distance. For just a moment, when no one else was looking, his mask slipped again. The smile was subtle, triumphant, and absolutely terrifying. He had achieved exactly what he'd planned. I was seriously injured. He was the hero of the story. And no one suspected that what had happened was anything other than a tragic accident during a family celebration. What Derek didn't know was that his moment of triumph had been recorded in perfect digital clarity, time-stamped and stored in a hidden backup system that would soon reveal the truth about what really happened at the top of those marble stairs. The hospital ceiling tiles became my constant companion for the next 4 days. 64 squares in perfect formation, each with tiny perforations that I counted obsessively while waiting for the pain medication to dull the sharp edges of my injuries. Concussion, 3 cracked ribs, a dislocated shoulder, extensive bruising, and what the doctor diplomatically called trauma consistent with a significant fall down a hard surface. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the attending physician in the emergency department, had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the gentle manner of someone who'd delivered bad news to families more times than she cared to count. But she also had the trained eye of a medical professional who'd seen too many accidents that didn't quite match the stated circumstances. "The pattern of your injuries is interesting, Maya," she said during one of her check-ins, her voice carefully neutral. "Falls downstairs usually result in injuries on one side of the body, following the direction of the tumble. But you have trauma distributed across multiple angles, suggesting impact from different directions." She paused, studying my chart. "Can you walk me through exactly what you remember about the fall?" I tried to explain what really happened, but my words came out slurred and confused due to the concussion. The medication made my thoughts fuzzy, and Derek's version of events had become the official narrative so quickly that questioning it seemed to make me appear delusional. When I insisted that Derek had pushed me, Dr. Martinez made notes about possible head injury-related confusion and recommended psychiatric evaluation once my physical injuries stabilized. Elena visited every day, bringing flowers, magazines, and a steady stream of anxious chatter designed to fill the uncomfortable silences. She looked exhausted, her eyes red-rimmed from crying and lack of sleep. Richard had to return to work after the first day, but Elena maintained a vigil beside my hospital bed, holding my uninjured hand and whispering apologies for the accident that had ruined Derek's celebration. Derek blames himself, she told me. On the second day, her voice thick with emotion. He keeps saying he should have insisted on helping you with all those chairs. He's barely eaten since it happened, just sitting in his room replaying what he could have done differently. Her description of Derek's supposed guilt made my stomach turn, but arguing only made me look more unstable and vindictive. Derek himself visited on the third day, arriving with Richard after school with a bouquet of sunflowers, my father's favorite, flower. A detail that felt like a deliberate psychological knife twist. He sat beside my bed with perfect posture, his face arranged in an expression of solemn concern that would have convinced anyone watching that he was genuinely devastated by his stepsister's accident. "Maya, I'm so sorry," he said, his voice breaking, slightly in exactly the right places. "I keep thinking that if I had just grabbed you faster, if I had insisted on carrying those chairs myself, none of this would have happened." He reached for my hand, his touch gentle and warm, completely at odds with the cold calculation I'd seen in his eyes at the top of the stairs. Richard stood behind Derek with obvious pride in his son's compassion and maturity. "Derek's been beating himself up about this," he said. "I keep telling him it was just an accident that these things happen, but he feels responsible because he was there." The irony was devastating. Derek was responsible, just not in the way Richard understood. When Elena stepped out to get coffee and Richard went to move the car from the hospital's emergency zone, Derek and I were alone for the first time since the attack. The transformation was immediate and chilling. His concerned expression melted away, replaced by the cold satisfaction of someone who had achieved exactly what he'd planned. "How are you feeling, Maya?" he asked, his voice dropping to the tone he used when no witnesses were present. "I hope you're not too confused about what happened. Head injuries can make people remember things wrong, you know? The doctor said confusion is totally normal after a concussion." He leaned closer, his voice becoming barely a whisper. "Everyone's been so impressed with how I've handled this crisis. Coach called to tell me how proud he is of my maturity during a family emergency. The college counselor said it shows real character, the way I've put your recovery ahead of celebrating my achievements." His smile was predatory. "You've actually made me look even better, Maya, just like I planned." The helplessness was overwhelming. Derek had not only succeeded in seriously injuring me, but he was being praised and admired for his response to the crisis he'd created. Every expression of sympathy for his guilt, every compliment about his maturity, every comment about what a wonderful young man he was becoming just reinforced his conviction that he could do anything and emerge as the hero of the story. "The beautiful thing about this situation," Derek continued, "is that now everyone knows how unstable you are. Talking about people pushing you when you obviously just fell down the stairs. Making wild accusations when your loving stepbrother is trying to support you through a difficult recovery." He patted my hand gently, the gesture appearing affectionate to any casual observer. "No one will ever believe anything you say about me again." When Elena and Richard returned, Derek seamlessly resumed his performance as the devoted stepbrother. He spent another hour at my bedside, reading to me from magazines, adjusting my pillows, and asking nurses about my care with the dedication of someone who genuinely cared about my well-being. The Oscar-worthy performance convinced everyone in the room except the one person who knew the truth. I was discharged from the hospital on a Thursday afternoon with a list of follow-up appointments, pain medication that made thinking difficult, and strict instructions about physical limitations during my recovery. Elena had prepared my room with extra pillows, a small refrigerator stocked with soft foods, and a collection of books and art supplies to keep me occupied during the weeks of healing ahead. Derek had left for college orientation the day before, my discharge, timing his departure perfectly to appear reluctant but necessary. "I hate leaving while Maya's still recovering," he told Elena with convincing anguish. "But the orientation is mandatory, and I can't afford to miss it." Elena practically pushed him out the door, insisting that he shouldn't sacrifice his education for an accident that wasn't his fault. The house felt different without Derek's presence, but not in the way I'd expected. Instead of relief, I felt an overwhelming sense of unfinished business, of justice denied and truth buried beneath a narrative that painted my attacker as a hero. The medication made sleeping difficult despite my exhaustion, and when I did manage to doze, nightmares of falling down endless marble stairs haunted my rest. Physical therapy began 2 weeks after the accident, a painful process of rebuilding strength and mobility that had been damaged in the fall. Sarah, my physical therapist, was a former athlete who understood the psychology of recovery from traumatic injury. She listened without judgment when I expressed frustration about the accident, anger about the impact on my junior year, and fear about long-term effects on my college plans. "Trauma affects everyone differently," she told me during one particularly difficult session. "Some people bounce back quickly, others need more time to process what happened to them. There's no right or wrong way to recover from something like this." Her validation meant more than she could know, especially when everyone else seemed to expect me to be grateful for Derek's support and focused only on physical healing. The school year resumed while I was still homebound, requiring tutors and modified assignments to keep up with my advanced placement courses. Elena drove me to appointments, helped with schoolwork, and tried to maintain normalcy. But there was an underlying tension that hadn't existed before the accident. She seemed constantly worried that I might have another episode of confusion, or make more accusations about Derek that would upset Richard. Derek called twice a week from college, conversations that Elena would put on speaker so I could participate from my recovery position on the living room couch. He regaled us with stories about dorm life, baseball practice, and college social events, always asking detailed questions about my physical therapy progress and academic catch-up plans. To anyone listening, he sounded like the perfect big brother, staying connected with his family and showing genuine concern for his injured sister. But there were subtle elements in these conversations that revealed Derek's continued psychological manipulation. He would make casual references to my accident-prone nature, wonder aloud whether I was being careful enough during recovery, and express concern about my emotional state following the head injury. Each comment was designed to reinforce the narrative of my instability while positioning himself as the caring family member who worried about my well-being. 6 weeks after the accident, I was cleared to return to school part-time, starting with morning classes and gradually increasing to a full schedule as my stamina improved. The hallways felt different when I walked through them with my arm still in a supportive sling, hyper-aware of the marble floors and concrete stairs that now seemed like potential weapons rather than architectural features. My teachers and classmates were universally sympathetic about the accident, offering help with missed assignments and expressing admiration for Derek's devotion during my recovery. Several people mentioned how mature and caring he'd been when they called to check on the family during my hospitalization. The narrative of Derek as the hero stepbrother had spread throughout our school community, making any attempt to contradict it seemed petty and vindictive. Photography class proved to be both therapeutic and frustrating. Working with cameras again reminded me of my father and the passion for truth-telling that had driven his art. But my injured shoulder made holding equipment difficult and painful. Mrs. Chen, my photography teacher, suggested focusing on digital editing and composition theory while my physical abilities recovered, but I found myself drawn to surveillance and documentary photography in ways I hadn't been before. "Your perspective has changed," Mrs. Chen observed during one class, studying a series of photos I'd taken of shadows and reflections around the school. "There's something more intentional about your work now, more focused on revealing hidden elements that others might miss." She didn't know how accurate her assessment was. My experience with Derek had taught me to look for truth in places where others saw only surface appearances. The breakthrough came almost 2 months after the accident, triggered by a seemingly routine maintenance issue. Richard had been having problems with the home security system, intermittent connectivity issues that caused gaps in the cloud storage backup. The security company technician, who came to diagnose the problem, discovered the hidden backup system in the basement utility room, the secondary storage device that the original installer had mentioned briefly, but Richard had forgotten about. "You've got a redundant system here," the technician explained to Richard as I sat nearby working on homework. "Continuous recording for 72 hours before it overwrites. Probably saved you from losing footage during the connectivity issues." He demonstrated how to access the backup files, explaining that they could be retrieved even if the main system had failed. The significance of this discovery hit me like lightning. If the backup system recorded continuously, then it would have captured what really happened at the top of the stairs during Derek's party. The push, the deliberate positioning, the calculated attack. Everything would be preserved in digital clarity, time-stamped and undeniable. But accessing the footage without arousing suspicion would require careful planning. Richard controlled the security system and would want to know why I was interested in reviewing old footage. Elena would likely view any request to see the recordings as evidence of obsessive thinking about the accident, possibly indicating ongoing mental health issues from the head injury. I needed to find a way to get the footage without revealing my intentions. The opportunity came during Richard's next business trip, a 3-day conference in Las Vegas that would leave Elena and me alone in the house. Elena planned to use the time for an intensive pottery session in the garage, working on pieces for an upcoming art show. Her creative focus would give me several hours of uninterrupted access to the basement utility room and the backup system. Auntie. The second night of Richard's absence, I waited until Elena was deeply absorbed in her work, the sounds of the pottery wheel and jazz music providing audio cover for my investigation. The basement was dark and musty, filled with Richard's storage boxes and unused exercise equipment. The utility room was tucked behind the water heater, a cramped space that housed the electrical panel, HVAC controls, and the hidden backup system. The tour device was smaller than I'd expected, about the size of a cable box, with a small digital display showing the date and time. Following the technician's instructions, I connected my laptop to the system using a USB cable I'd found in Richard's desk drawer. The interface was simple, just a calendar display where I could select the date I wanted to review. May 15th, the day of Derek's party. The day my life changed forever. The footage loaded slowly, displaying the multiple camera feeds in a grid format on my laptop screen. I fast-forwarded through the morning preparation, the guest arrivals, the party activities, looking for the timestamp that would show Derek and me going upstairs to get the chairs. The staircase camera had a perfect view of the landing and the top third of the stairs, exactly the area where the attack had occurred. When I found the right time frame, my heart began racing so hard I was afraid Elena might hear it from the garage. The footage showed me walking toward the storage closet carrying chairs, Derek following behind. But instead of helping me, he positioned himself at the top of the stairs, blocking my path when I tried to return. The conversation wasn't audible, but Derek's body language was unmistakably threatening. He moved closer to me, gesturing aggressively, clearly intimidating me as I backed away with the chairs in my arms. Then came the moment that would change everything. Derek's deliberate lunge forward, his hands reaching for my shoulders. The intentional push that sent me tumbling down the marble staircase. The footage was devastating in its clarity. There was no accident, no loss of balance, no tragic mishap during a helpful gesture. Derek had attacked me with full knowledge that a fall down those stairs could seriously injure or kill me. The push was followed immediately by Derek's performance, his rushed descent down the stairs, his calls for help that brought Elena and Richard running. I watched the sequence 3 times, each viewing revealing new details that confirmed the premeditated nature of the attack. Derek had checked to make sure no one was watching before positioning himself strategically. He had calculated the angle of the push to maximize my chances of serious injury. He had prepared his story and his emotional response before anyone else arrived on the scene, but having the footage was only half the battle. I needed to preserve it, copy it, and find a way to reveal the truth without Derek having the opportunity. to destroy the evidence or create some alternative explanation. He was due home for Thanksgiving break in 3 weeks, and I suspected he might want to review the footage himself to ensure there were no problems with his cover story. I copied the relevant files to a secure folder on my laptop, then transferred them to multiple flash drives hidden in different locations around my room. I uploaded encrypted copies to cloud storage accounts Derek didn't know about, ensuring that even if he discovered and destroyed the original footage, the evidence would survive. The next step was deciding how to use the evidence. Going to Elena. And Richard first seemed logical, but Derek's psychological manipulation had been so effective that they might refuse to believe what they were seeing. Derek's charm and their investment in his success could make them rationalize even video evidence of his violence. Instead, I decided to start with Dr. Martinez, the emergency room physician who had noticed inconsistencies in my injuries from the beginning. Medical professionals were trained to recognize signs of abuse and had protocols for reporting suspicious circumstances. She would know how to proceed with the evidence in a way that would protect me from Derek's retaliation while ensuring the truth was properly investigated. 3 days later, I sat in Dr. Martinez's office with my laptop, watching her expression change from professional interest to shock to anger as she viewed the security footage. The attack was even more disturbing when seen by someone with medical training who understood exactly how dangerous Derek's actions had been. "Maya?" she said quietly after watching the sequence twice. "This isn't an accident. This is attempted murder. That push was designed to cause maximum trauma, and you're incredibly lucky that your injuries weren't fatal." She paused, studying my face. "How long have you had this footage?" "I found it a week ago," I admitted. I wasn't sure who to tell or how to handle it. Derek's been making everyone think I'm unstable since the accident, so I was afraid no one would believe me even with proof. Dr. Martinez was already reaching for her phone. "We need to involve the police immediately. This footage shows a clear assault, and there may be other victims we don't know about. Predatory behavior like this typically escalates over time." Her validation of what I'd experienced was overwhelming. Finally, someone with authority was seeing Derek for what he really was. The call to Detective Lisa Park at the Phoenix Police Department set in motion a chain of events that would expose Derek's true nature to everyone who had been fooled by his performance. But it would also put me in more danger than I'd ever imagined, because Derek would soon discover that his perfect crime hadn't been as perfect as he'd believed. The security camera that had silently recorded his attack would become the tool of his downfall. But first, he would have one last chance to try to destroy the evidence and eliminate the witness who could expose him for the monster he really was. Detective Lisa Park had the weathered look of someone who'd spent 15 years working violent crimes in Phoenix, her gray-streaked hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her sharp eyes missing nothing as she studied the security footage on her laptop. She'd seen domestic violence cases in every form imaginable, but something about this particular video made her jaw tighten with professional anger. "This is one of the most calculated attacks I've witnessed," she said after viewing Derek's assault, for the 3rd time. The positioning, the timing, the immediate performance afterward. This perpetrator planned every element in advance. She looked up from the screen to meet my eyes. "Maya, what you're showing me isn't just assault. Given the height of those stairs and the marble surface, this was attempted murder." The words hung in the air between us like a physical weight. Attempted murder. Derek hadn't just lost his temper or acted impulsively. He had deliberately tried to kill me in a way that would appear accidental. The realization was both terrifying and validating. After months of being gaslit and told I was confused or unstable, a trained professional was confirming that my experience had been real and my life had been in genuine danger. Dr. Martinez sat beside me in the conference room at the police station, her presence providing the medical credibility that gave my case immediate legitimacy. "The injury pattern was suspicious from the beginning," she explained to Detective Park. "Multiple impact points from different angles, trauma that didn't match a simple fall. But this footage explains everything we observed during Maya's initial treatment. Detective Park began building the case methodically, starting with a comprehensive background check on Derek that revealed disturbing patterns I'd never known about. His middle school had documented incidents of bullying that escalated to physical violence, always with plausible explanations that protected him from serious consequences. His previous baseball coach had noted anger management issues and concerning behavior toward teammates. But Derek's talent and Richard's influence had prevented any formal disciplinary action. Most shocking was the discovery that Derek's biological mother hadn't died in a car accident as he'd always claimed. Medical records revealed that she'd died from injuries sustained during a domestic violence incident, with Derek present in the house at the time. The perpetrator was his mother's boyfriend, but witness statements from neighbors mentioned Derek's strange behavior and disturbing reactions to his mother's death. "We're looking at a pattern of violence that goes back years," Detective Park explained during our second meeting. "Your stepbrother has been hiding behind charm and manipulation while escalating his violent behavior. What happened to you was likely his most serious attempt yet, but there are indicators that he's been building toward this level of violence for some time." The investigation revealed that Derek had researched my daily routines obsessively, studying my schedule, my habits, and my relationships with meticulous precision. His laptop, seized through a search warrant executed at his dorm room, contained detailed notes about my activities, photographs taken without my knowledge, and even a timeline leading up to his graduation party that showed premeditated planning. For what he called the accident, his internet search history was a roadmap of calculated violence, queries about accidental deaths from falls, head injury symptoms, how police investigate domestic accidents, and statute of limitations. Assault charges painted a picture of someone who had researched every aspect of his planned attack. He'd even studied the security camera system Richard had installed, learning about camera angles and recording limitations to ensure his attack would occur in what he believed was a surveillance blind spot. But Derek's biggest mistake was underestimating the backup system that had recorded everything in perfect digital clarity. The forensic analysis of the footage confirmed what Dr. Martinez and I had observed. The push was deliberate, forceful, and designed to cause maximum trauma when I hit. The marble stairs. Frame-by-frame analysis showed Derek calculating the angle and force needed to ensure I would fall backward down the full length of the staircase. Elena's reaction to the evidence was devastating to witness. Detective Park and I met with her at the police station, away from Richard's protective influence and Derek's long-distance manipulation. When she saw the footage for the first time, her face went through a progression of emotions: confusion, disbelief, horror, and finally a crushing understanding of how completely she'd failed to protect her daughter. "I don't understand," she whispered, watching Derek push me down the stairs with calculated violence. "He seemed so concerned afterward. He called for help immediately. He visited you in the hospital every day." Her voice broke as the reality settled in. How could I have been so blind? The psychological manipulation Derek had used on Elena became clear as Detective Park walked her through the investigation findings. Derek had deliberately cultivated an image of the devoted stepbrother while systematically isolating me and undermining my credibility. Every kind gesture, every expression of concern, every performance of familial love had been designed to provide cover for escalating abuse that would culminate in what he planned as my accidental death. Elena's guilt was overwhelming, but Detective Park helped her understand that she'd been a victim of Derek's manipulation as well. Predators like Derek are experts at exploiting people's need to believe in family unity and normalcy, she explained. He knew exactly how to present himself, as the caring son while positioning Maya as the problem child. Your desire to create a blended family became a weapon he used against both of you. Richard's response was more complicated and ultimately more damaging. When Detective Park informed him of the investigation and showed him selected portions of the evidence, His initial reaction was denial followed by anger, not at Derek, but at the accusation itself. Richard had invested too much of his identity in Derek's success to accept the truth about his son's violent nature. "This is ridiculous," Richard declared during the contentious meeting at our house. "Derek would never hurt Maya intentionally. He's been nothing but supportive since the accident. This whole investigation is based on misinterpreting a tragic accident." His refusal to acknowledge the evidence, even when presented with Derek's own research and planning documents, revealed how deeply his favoritism had blinded him to reality. Detective Park remained professional but firm. "Mr. Blackwood, we have video evidence of your son deliberately pushing Maya down the stairs, digital evidence of premeditation, and a pattern of escalating violence that puts others at risk. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is attempted murder." But Richard's investment in Derek's innocence was too complete to be shaken by facts. The legal proceedings began swiftly once the district attorney reviewed the evidence. Derek was charged with attempted murder in the first degree, aggravated assault, and domestic violence. His college scholarship was immediately revoked, and Arizona State suspended him pending the outcome of the criminal case. The carefully constructed life Richard had built for his son began crumbling as the truth about Derek's nature became public. Derek's initial reaction to the charges was predictable: complete denial and claims that the footage had been doctored or misinterpreted. His expensive defense attorney, hired by Richard despite the family's financial strain, attempted to argue that the security footage was unreliable and that Derek's actions could be interpreted as an attempt to help me rather than harm me. But the prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Walsh, had built an overwhelming case. The forensic analysis of the footage, combined with Derek's research history and the medical evidence of my injuries, created an irrefutable narrative of premeditated violence. Derek's own digital trail had documented his planning so thoroughly that his defense team had few options beyond questioning my mental state and suggesting that I had somehow manipulated the evidence. The preliminary hearing revealed just how much Derek had hidden from everyone around him. Fellow students at Arizona State testified about his disturbing comments about violence, his obsession with true crime stories involving perfect murders, and his casual discussion of ways to seriously injure people while making it appear accidental. His dormitory roommate described finding detailed floor plans of our house and notes about my daily schedule hidden in Derek's belongings. Most damaging was testimony from Derek's former girlfriend, Ashley, who had broken up with him shortly after, starting college when his behavior became increasingly controlling and violent. She described instances where Derek had practiced different emotional reactions in front of a mirror, perfecting his ability to appear grief-stricken or concerned on command. She'd witnessed him researching my social media profiles obsessively and making disturbing comments about teaching me permanent lessons about respect. The prosecution's psychological evaluation of Derek painted a chilling picture of someone with antisocial personality disorder who had learned to mimic normal emotional responses while harboring violent fantasies. Dr. Rebecca Chen, the forensic psychiatrist who evaluated Derek, testified that his ability to maintain a charming facade while planning serious violence indicated a level of psychological manipulation that suggested he would continue to be dangerous, if not incarcerated. Derek Blackwood presents as a highly intelligent individual who has learned to exploit social expectations and family dynamics to avoid accountability for increasingly serious violent behavior, Dr. Chen explained to the court. The attack on Maya represents an escalation that, given his psychological profile, would likely have continued with other victims if he hadn't been apprehended. Meanwhile, Derek's influence on our family dynamic became clear as Elena and Richard's marriage deteriorated under the strain of the investigation. Elena's guilt over failing to protect me, combined with her growing understanding of how thoroughly Derek had manipulated her, created a rift with Richard that proved impossible to bridge. Richard's continued defense of Derek and his resentment toward me for destroying his son's future made living in the same house untenable. Elena filed for divorce 3 months after Derek's arrest, citing irreconcilable differences that were rooted in fundamentally different understandings of what had happened in our family. Richard's financial resources were being drained by Derek's legal defense, and his business relationships suffered as news of the charges became public. The perfect suburban life he'd built around Derek's success collapsed as quickly as it had been constructed. The trial itself was a media sensation in Phoenix, with local news outlets covering every detail of the staircase stepbrother case. Derek's attack had been so carefully planned and dramatically executed that it captured public attention in ways that typical domestic violence cases often didn't. The security footage became a crucial piece of evidence that prosecutors used to demonstrate the calculated nature of the attack. Derek's testimony on his own behalf was a masterclass in manipulation that ultimately backfired spectacularly. He attempted to portray himself as the loving stepbrother who had been trying to help me with the chairs, suggesting that the footage showed him reaching out to steady me rather than push me. But under cross-examination by ADA Walsh, his carefully constructed persona began to crack. "Mr. Blackwood," Walsh asked during a particularly intense exchange, "if you were trying to help Maya maintain her balance, why did you position yourself between her and the safest path back downstairs?" Derek's answer revealed his underlying arrogance and lack of genuine empathy as he struggled to explain actions that were clearly visible in the footage. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Derek was sentenced to 12 years in prison for attempted murder, with additional time for the assault and domestic violence charges. The judge, noting the premeditated nature of the attack and Derek's lack of remorse, denied the defense's request for a reduced sentence. The evidence in this case reveals a level of calculated violence that endangered not only the victim, but potentially others in the defendant's social circle, Judge Maria Santos explained during sentencing. Derek Blackwood's ability to maintain a facade of normalcy while planning serious violence makes him a continued threat to public safety. As Derek was led away in handcuffs, he turned to look at me one final time. The mask was completely gone, now replaced by the cold hatred I'd seen at the top of the stairs before he pushed me. There was no remorse, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, just the rage of someone who had been caught and held accountable for actions he'd believed he could commit with impunity. Richard attended every day of the trial, maintaining his belief in Derek's innocence even after the guilty verdict. His final words to Elena before she moved out of the house were a promise to appeal the conviction and his conviction that Derek had been railroaded by a justice system that didn't understand the pressures facing young men today. He would spend the next several years filing unsuccessful appeals and visiting Derek in prison, never accepting the truth about his son's violent nature. But for Elena and me, Derek's conviction marked the beginning of a new chapter. The truth had finally been revealed, documented, and officially acknowledged. The security camera that Derek had ignored, believing it couldn't see his crime, had become the instrument of justice that ensured he would be held accountable for trying to murder me. Standing outside the courthouse after Derek's sentencing, Elena put her arm around my shoulders. The first physical affection I'd felt from her in years that wasn't tinged with guilt or manipulation. "I'm so sorry, Maya," she said quietly. "I should have believed you. I should have protected you. I should have seen what he really was." The apology meant everything, but it also marked the beginning of a long process of rebuilding trust and healing from the trauma that Derek had inflicted on our entire family. The security footage that had saved my life and ensured Derek's conviction was just the first step in a journey toward recovery that would take years to complete. But Derek's influence wasn't completely eliminated by his incarceration. Prison would give him time to plan, to nurse his grievances, and to consider what he might do when he was eventually released. The 12-year sentence seemed long, but I knew it wouldn't be permanent. Someday, Derek would be free again, and when that day came, I needed to be ready. 5 years have passed since Derek's conviction, and my life looks nothing like the nightmare it once was. Elena and I moved to Tucson after the trial, where she opened a small pottery studio and I finished high school at a supportive arts-focused charter school. The distance from Phoenix and the memories associated with that marble staircase gave us both the space we needed to heal. College became my sanctuary in ways I never expected. I chose to study digital forensics and criminal justice, inspired by Detective Park and the technology that had saved my life. My professors were impressed by my practical understanding of evidence preservation and my ability to spot inconsistencies in digital media. The trauma that Derek inflicted became the foundation for a career dedicated to helping other victims find justice. Elena blossomed once she was free from Richard's controlling influence and Derek's psychological manipulation. Her art grew bolder, more expressive, dealing with themes of survival and transformation that resonated with galleries across Arizona. She never remarried, but she found peace in independence and pride in the strong woman she rediscovered within herself. Therapy remained a constant in both our lives. Dr. Patricia Wells, the trauma specialist we found in Tucson, helped us understand that healing wasn't about forgetting what happened, but about reclaiming our power and refusing to let Derek's violence define our futures. Elena learned to forgive herself for the years she spent blind to Derek's true nature, while I worked through the complex emotions of surviving a murder attempt by someone who was supposed to be family. The security camera footage that convicted Derek became part of my senior thesis project on digital evidence in domestic violence cases. I've spoken at conferences about the importance of technology in documenting abuse, helping law enforcement officers and advocates understand how perpetrators use manipulation to avoid accountability. Each presentation includes a disclaimer about Derek's upcoming parole eligibility, a reminder that justice doesn't always mean permanent safety. Richard never recovered from Derek's conviction. His construction business failed as clients lost. Confidence in his judgment and his appeals on Derek's behalf consumed his savings and damaged his reputation beyond repair. He visits Derek monthly in prison, still convinced that his son was wrongly convicted despite overwhelming evidence. Elena receives occasional angry letters from him, blaming her for destroying his family by supporting the prosecution. Derek himself has spent his incarceration learning new manipulation tactics from other inmates and corresponding with true crime enthusiasts who view him as wrongly convicted. His letters to Elena, which she forwards to police, reveal an unchanged personality that continues to blame everyone else for his circumstances. He's eligible for parole in 7 years, and I'm already preparing for that possibility. I carry pepper spray now and maintain security cameras at my apartment, habits that some might consider paranoid, but that I view as practical precautions. Derek's psychological profile suggested he would blame me for his conviction and seek revenge when released. Detective Park, now retired, still checks in periodically and has promised to notify me of any changes in Derek's incarceration status. The marble staircase in Richard's house was carpeted after we moved out, but I drive past occasionally when visiting Phoenix. The house looks smaller now, ordinary rather than intimidating. The security cameras are gone, removed when Richard could no longer afford the monitoring service. Sometimes I wonder if new owners know what happened in their entryway, if they feel the echo of violence in those elegant lines. My relationships with men developed slowly, built on foundations of honesty about my past and clear communication about boundaries. Trust comes carefully when you've experienced betrayal from someone who was supposed to protect you, but it does come. I've learned to recognize manipulation tactics that once seemed normal, to value consistency over charm, and to trust my instincts when something feels wrong. The photography skills my father taught me evolved into expertise with surveillance technology and digital forensics. Every case I work reminds me of the importance of evidence, of documentation, of believing victims when they describe experiences that others might dismiss. The scared girl who fled down that staircase became a woman who helps other survivors prove their truth. Elena and I talk about Derek's eventual release sometimes, planning for safety measures and discussing whether we'll need to relocate again. But we refuse to let fear of his future freedom paralyze our present happiness. Derek stole years of our lives through violence and manipulation, but he won't steal any more through the mere threat of his return. The security camera that captured Derek's crime sits in my office now, a reminder of how technology can serve justice when human witnesses fail. Students who visit ask about its significance, and I tell them the story of a backup system that no one remembered installing, recording truth that no one expected to need. Derek pushed me down those stairs intending to end my life and destroy the evidence of his crime. Instead, he created the very evidence that would convict him and gave me a purpose that transformed trauma into strength. The fall that was meant to kill me became the foundation for a life dedicated to ensuring that other victims' voices are heard and believed. In 7 years, Derek will likely walk free. When that day comes, I'll be ready. Not as the frightened teenager he tried to murder, but as the woman who survived his worst and built something beautiful from the wreckage. The security camera showed the world who Derek really was. Now it's up to me to show them who I became in spite of him. Sometimes justice isn't about the punishment fitting the crime. Sometimes it's about refusing to let the crime define the victim. Derek may have won those few seconds at the top of the stairs, but I won everything that came after. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.